Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Hello, magical ones. Welcome. In today's modern spiritless society, magical women are often living in hiding from their power and magic for fear of being outcast and burned at the stake. They sell themselves short, giving away their souls in return for love, approval, and security, leaving themselves burned out, burdened, and longing for a life of more, but feeling powerless to create it. I've walked that path, so I've created a portal to help magical women harness their power and discover their gifts so that they can reclaim their radiance. Our Facebook community is a safe and alchemical altar space filled with sisterhood, liberation, and magic. So why not head over and join us by searching Secret Witch Circle on Facebook. We'll see you there. My guest today is healing author Stella Tomlinson. Stella is a priestess and author of 3 books, including Cycles of Belonging, Honouring Ourselves Through the Sacred Cycles of Life, published by Womancraft Publishing. Her offerings are based on over 20 years' experience in personal and spiritual healing and development through meditation, yoga, mindfulness, energy healing, and goddess and nature spirituality, and she's been teaching and writing in these fields since 2011. In this episode, we explored the relevance of the various cycles of life, including breath, circadian, sacred blood, the moon, the life cycles, and goddess archetypes. We illuminated the possibilities and gifts and some shadows of us living in tune with each of life's cycles, especially as a woman and especially as magical women, exploring how to harness the cycles of life in your own life to create healing. Let's dive in. Welcome, Stella. The wonderful Lucy Pierce recommended you as a guest, and I am so glad she did. I'm loving what I've read so far in your book, The Cycles of Belonging, and the wisdom you have to share around sacred cyclical living. And it's so timely, given as this kind of will be released as we are deep in our Invoke Your Feminine Mystery Crucible. So I'm excited to dive into this one. And thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, gorgeous. So as we were just chatting, you said that you resonate with quite a lot of the secret witch's journey into her witch queen. So I thought it'd be good to just begin there, really, and find out a bit more about your own journey, especially around the kind of teachings that you have around the sacred cyclical living as well. Maybe we can start there.
Okay, well, I guess we kind of start, as I do a book, or we start where we are at. So where I'm at now is I am an author and poet and priestess of Bridget, and a highly sensitive soul. I'm a 47-year-old perimenopausal queen. So that's where I'm at now. But I guess where I kind of, it's kind of like a little circle going on. Funny that, little cycle, because I started off, I was a child of Imbolc. My birthday is the 2nd of February. So I have a very deep connection to Bridget, who that is her sort of her day, 2nd of February in Imbolc. So I didn't know that for most of my life, but I digress. But I was also
my mum's birthday.
Okay, there we go. So I was kind of like a fiery, independent Imbolc child when I was very, very young. I think I was pretty fearless. I was full of joy. I just go around singing, and I was very, very independent minded. I wouldn't be told things. I wouldn't be told what I thought. But then somewhere along the line, as it can often happen, is I became instead a good daughter of the patriarchy. I kind of shrank and became the good girl, and lost that inner fire. Now, for me personally, there's been two kind of, well, one personal and one bigger influence on that. I guess the personal influence was that I, a daughter of a mother with a lot of unhealed emotional trauma and emotional wounds. So I think on one level, I began to shrink to fit into what I thought my mother wanted me to be. And that is not too noisy, not too much, not so independent. So that kind of one level going on. But I think as all of us experience, we have that impetus, that influence, that conditioning to be good daughters of the patriarchy, to focus on, well, in my case, it was focusing on looking for external validation through getting my head down at school, working hard, focusing on getting good grades all the time, and locating all my sense of self-worth in good grades, doing well at school, being the good girl, you know, not rocking the boat. I also played 3 instruments, the flute, violin and piano, so there's a lot of focus on that as well. And looking for outward affirmation and approval through what I could do through music, through what I could do through good grades. And that kind of went through through my teenage years, my 20s, and kind of even into my 30s to a certain extent. But I'm just going to pause and mention something which is very important, and also very important in terms of what we're talking about today, is that my experience of menarche, my first period, age 12, was not good, as for many of us, particularly those of us in our 40s, perhaps, and older. I mean, maybe now I live in hope that now young women, as they reach menarche, that there's perhaps more of a positive experience potentially going on. But it was an experience filled with shame and feeling that I was dirty, and I didn't really know much about it. My mother hadn't spoken to me about it particularly, so that was another kind of marker that's this women. My body does this. This is ugh. So another kind of patriarchal tool of shaming and feeling not good enough. So so this all kind of led into create a kind of sort of toxic inner soup of just not feeling good enough, not feeling, not knowing who I was, wanting to people please all the time. So, through it's kind of gaining approval of my mother or gaining approval of anybody, please approve of me, that kind of thing. Through school, through work, I kind of fell into things. Like when I went to university, I went to the postgraduate degree, and I kind of drifted into becoming a librarian, drifted into being a web editor, internal communications, all very just drifty, like I had no agency, just things sort of seemed to just go that way. And it wasn't a great place to be. I know looking back now, I was completely disconnected from my soul self, my inner self, my inner power, inner wisdom. I suffered with migraines. I ended up with chronic irritable bowel syndrome, and anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, all the full joys. I mean, at 25, I discovered yoga. So that started to help me to reconnect to my body, because I was completely disconnected from my body. There was just kind of thing, it was just so much overwhelming emotions and feelings through all this that I just sort of ended up dissociating a lot. And yoga started to help me to bring myself back into my body. And indeed, I did eventually train to be a yoga teacher and taught yoga from 2011 to 2020. But what really made a change for me happened aged 40. And I don't think there's any coincidence there. There's something, I think, there's an alchemical time, particularly in your 40s and leading into perimenopause and that kind of stuff that is going on, whether you realize it or not. So I don't think, looking back, there's any coincidence that age 40, I read 3 books which completely sort of shifted my perspective and changed my life. The first book was a book about Wicca. It seemed to just sort of like fall into my hand in a bookshop one day. I was like, okay. And I remember reading about that and the Wheel of the Year. and particularly something about Samhain really, I just remember the reason bit about Samhain, it really kind of just really resonated with me, and the sense of homecoming. And so that was one book. So these all happened, say, in when I was 40 in 2015. I then also came across The Trait of High Sensitivity, the book, The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron. And I read that and it's like, oh my goodness, I tick all of those boxes, all of those traits. That is me. My life now makes sense. All the struggles I'd experienced, oh my gosh, they now made sense. I stopped, well, I won't say this happened overnight. I didn't suddenly overnight go, oh yes, I fully accept myself now. But it really helped me to understand why I had struggled and why I continue to struggle at that time with like having no boundaries, taking on everybody else's emotions, and that whole people pleasing thing, because you're kind of so plugged into other people's energies that it's sort of like you just molding yourself to fit in. So that was another major kind of awakening. And the third one was reading the book Code Red by Lisa Lister, which is all about unlocking the power of your menstrual cycle. And bless him, my husband bought it me for Christmas. I think it was on my Christmas list. I think I said, I want this for Christmas. I know. He probably didn't know what he was doing by giving me that book. It's like, because I read that and the fire came back. The fire lit inside of me. Why did I not know this before? Why had I been, to the age of 40, completely cut off from my menstrual cycle? Which, as a person who menstruates, is just it's just a part of your life. It's such an important part of your life, in terms of your body, your emotions, your spirit, your soul. And up until that point, my monthly bleed had been a very inconvenient, messy thing I didn't really like. I usually had a few days around day 25 where everything was going to shit and I hated everything. I hated myself. And other than that, I didn't really know what else. Obviously, I knew it was something to do with, potentially getting pregnant, that kind of stuff. I knew the kind of the basics of biology, but I'd never been introduced to the idea that actually there is a power in the menstrual cycle. There are gifts in the menstrual cycle, all the different phases. So that really kind of, since then, I've almost immediately I started tracking my cycle and really kind of learning more about it. I came across the work of Red School, and which is amazing, and did some of their online courses and really kind of threw myself into that aspect of cyclic living. And I guess, as I said, already mentioned, that Wicker book and that book about the Wheel of the Year had also kind of called to me. So I started then learning more about the Wheel of the Year and energies there, and how as a child I'd always loved flowers. My nan had this lovely kind of rose garden and vegetable patches and all sorts of things, so I'd always loved being out in nature. But again, that I got underground a bit, I guess. So
it's funny, isn't it, how we always have these kind of hints in our childhood of who we really are.
Yeah. And it can take a while to go back and realize, can't it, and to actually look at and realize that I was quite a little fiery, independent girl. And yeah, I'm quite a fiery, independent woman now. So that then led to working the Wheel of the Year and really appreciating the cycles of the seasons and the moon and all these different cycles. And ultimately, really, that led me to a connection to the divine feminine, to goddess, to, again, another fire was lit. I mean, when I was a child, I was a bit like, why is God a man? Just what? I'm not sure I like this kind of thing. But as I got into my 40s, I was much more than connecting, to a feminist spirituality of goddess, the mother, the ancient mother, and which then led me to Bridget, which led me to training to become a priestess in Glastonbury. I trained for 2. I wasn't in Glastonbury for 2 years, unfortunately, but I was going backwards and forwards to Glastonbury for 2 years. And then I initiated as a priestess of Bridget. Oh gosh, what year? Start of 2020. So I guess now I'm in the place where I've done a lot of healing over the last 7 years as well around these mother wounding issues, on my individual level, and looking at the internalized patriarchy, the internalized white supremacy, the internalized capitalist that's within me, because it's the waters that we all swim in. And I really credit that discovery of, or reclaiming of, my menstrual cycle as that's what unlocked the key to all of this, to finding my voice, to start writing. This is my third book. I'm working on 2 more books at the moment. I found my voice. So it's just been a really powerful journey, which I absolutely credit that. Connecting to my menstrual cycle for me was the key to unlock that inner truth, that inner power, and my voice.
Gorgeous. There's so much here. I think all of our listeners will be really feeling resonance with this, particularly around kind of your experience of being that good girl and that longing for approval and all of that stuff. And I'm really wanting to dive into the sacred cyclical living. But I just also wanted to speak to the fact that as you say, kind of all of these things, our wounding often kind of leads us on this path of discovery. So I often call it kind of material for our liberation. So I really love how you spoke to that in terms of sharing your journey there. So I'd love to hear more around cyclical living, and obviously I'm quite familiar with it, and particularly love Red Skull's work as well. In fact, I think they were on an old series I did, Shani and Alexandra. So maybe I should invite them back. That would be cool. So I love all of that. But I'd love to hear, and I think particularly for our secret witches who are listening at home, I'd love to hear like the importance from you around cyclical living, and why especially it's important for people who identify with the kind of witch archetype, I guess. Why is it especially important? Because it feels to me that for magical women, it's even more important. So I just wondered if you could speak to that first.
Okay, yeah. So I guess the thing that really resonated with me and continues to resonate with me with cyclical living is at its core, it's a recognition that life is not a straight line. It is not linear. We are beings of nature. All of us as humanity, we are in nature. We are of nature. We are not separate. And nature, certainly in our hemisphere where we live in the UK, is very clearly cyclical, seasonal. So why do we live as if we are supposed to be on a constant? Why do we have this obsession in industrialized societies with perpetual growth? It's not natural. That's not how the earth works. And in being forced into this linearity of constantly being productive, of denying our needs for rest, recuperation, or just denying the fact that life is a spiral, we do ourselves individually great damage. Simply, we're burning ourselves out on one level if you're constantly, particularly, if you have a menstrual cycle, you're constantly going through this seasonal energy of spring, summer, autumn, winter, of birth, of growth, of fullness, of release, of decay, of death and rebirth. Every month or every menstrual cycle, you're going through that. And if you live completely ignoring that, overriding it, on a physical level, it's not healthy, because you just fry your nervous system, particularly if you're highly sensitive. On a spiritual level, you're missing out on an emotional level as well. You're missing out on the gifts that each of these seasons, these inner and outer seasons, bring. And
I love that. I'm just
Yeah.
really curious because I was having a conversation with a client actually about how often we can be so tempted to stay in this kind of linear, wanting to know. It's almost strikes me as this kind of when it's linear, we know, we think we know. So I'm wondering if part of the resistance to that is the kind of messiness of the feminine and its cycles. I wonder if you can speak to that a little
Oh,
bit.
absolutely. That's the thing. We would like, I mean, in some ways, life on the surface level might appear to be simpler if it was linear. But it's just not, though. It's just this kind of this thing that's been imposed onto life by patriarchy, because it wants, to
Yeah, it's
feed
almost
itself.
That kind of control
Yeah.
shadow sneaking in
Yeah.
to try
Because
and keep us where we are rather than
yeah,
expanding.
yeah, because it is messy, but it's a spiral. It's not like, the spiral. It's not a circle. You just come back to start and you just haven't learned anything. You carry on and you just keep repeating. With cyclical awareness, each, and I know Red School talk a lot about this with your menstrual cycle, for example. Each menstrual cycle is the opportunity to kind of let die what needs to die, so you can then be reborn. So it's actually, I'm reading a book at the moment by Bill Plotkin called Nature and the Human Soul, and he talks about the spiral and the arc. So life is cyclical, life goes in spirals, but there's also an arc to our lives. So talking that here at the individual level, that we're spiraling through, whether it's our menstrual cycle, each lunar cycle, each year, but we're also on a journey of an arc of the kind of, what I talk about in the book is the life stage archetypes of maiden, lover, mother, queen, and crone. So each cycle that we attend to, whether it's the cycle of the breath, the cycle of the day, the menstrual cycle, the lunar cycle, the annual cycle, seasonal cycle, each one is giving us an opportunity to learn, to shed what needs to be shed, to grow what needs to be grown. And that's so much richer than a linear.
Absolutely.
You're born, you go along a straight line, then you die, and then that's it. It's so much richer.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I absolutely acknowledge it's challenging, because we're having to swim against the tide in honoring that. But anyway, the world of the emotions and cycles and the death cycles and that kind of stuff, yeah, it's hard, it's messy. But gosh, I feel much more content, joyful, real person for having finally engaged with these over the last 7 years than I ever did in the previous 40 years of my life. So
yeah. Absolutely. And I think it comes back to that choice, doesn't it? It's like that we can either choose to stay as we are, kind of bypassing all the truth of life and all this kind of cyclical nature of living, and or we can choose to expand and become who we really are. And I think what you spoke to there about the kind of the darkness, the death part of that cycle seems to be something that as a culture we kind of avoid, I guess. And it feels to me, again, a big part of the work with the witch archetype that I do is that kind of embracing of the darkness. So I guess each cycle has its own period of darkness that helps us to really come and look at the truth of that, feel it and heal it. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the witch archetype, or us as witches, that it's almost like for me, this is my experience of it, it's almost like our kind of natural territory. I love a dark moon. I actually love the kind of the death of the year in terms of autumn and winter. I know and also I am in perimenopause myself, so I'm in my inner autumn as a life stage, and that is a shedding, that's death and rebirth, a journey of descent and return, though I'm very much on the descent, I'm feeling, but there's something about, I think, the witch, that is, she knows the power of it, the potency, and she's not afraid of it. And as you said, as a culture, as societies, westernized societies, we are afraid of the dark. There's a lot of obviously there's whole tones of racism around this kind of demonization of the dark, but yeah, and also because I've been hanging around in spiritual circles, spiritual well-being circles for over 20 years now, and having been heavily involved in the past in yoga, there's also a tendency to to focus on transcendence in our spiritual practice, to go up to the light, to go to the light out of the body, to choose love, to and unfortunately, and I know I did this myself, so I'm not saying this with any judgment, because I have been there and done that. A whole lot of spiritual bypassing
Me
going
too.
on.
I love that you're talking to this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've been there. Love and light, namaste, love and light. And it's like, I actually choose love, which is lovely on one level. It's the spring and summer energy, but it's, you know, it's not everything. We also have darkness and complex emotions, which is the autumn and winter.
And bodies
and
to be
in. Bodies, absolutely. And that's the thing. No, spirit is very much my kind of understanding of it, about transcending and connecting to the oneness, which is a beautiful experience. And soul is the descent into the body, into your essential being, your essential nature, and into the underworld of the psyche and emotions and all these beautiful messy things, in the descent to the goddess, which is, I think, a name of a book I've read actually. So yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, I didn't come up with that one myself. You descend to the goddess.
I love that. Yeah. And and really I see it as a kind of co-creation between the two, but that's probably for another episode. But I just really want to stick with cycles. So one of the things as well I've seen that women can experience when they're in that darkness is kind of this they can arrive at a place that feels quite hopeless, and often there'll be still some sense of hope for women who are walking this path. But I guess, how do cycles, for me, the way I see the journey is that women often are in hope, which will then kind of kindle that fire again of desire and possibility. And I suppose the journey that I see women walk is from kind of hope into possibility, into desire, into devotion. So I'm just wondering how cycles kind of open us up to possibility when we're kind of in that darkness. I guess there's something for me around that in this, like what you're talking to already, around it offers us that new beginning. You know, that darkness, that death at the heart of the cycle is always before that rebirth. So I don't know if you can speak to that a little
Well,
bit.
that is exactly what I was going to say. You know, that when we are approaching the death aspect with a cyclical point of view, we know it's not the end. Whereas if you're in the linear viewpoint, all the energy, or anything we think about as death is literally like, that's it, death's the end. We don't want to think about it, don't want to go there. Whereas if you're connected to the cycles, so whether it's literally the seasons, it's a very good teacher. When everything in winter appears to be dead, that's only on the surface, because underneath there's a lot going on. You know, the nutrients have all been drawn back into the roots or the bulbs of plants, and there's a lot of actually stuff going on beneath the surface. And like new life will follow in spring. And I know it all can seem like a cliche to say that, but I think it's also very deep. It's often cliches, they have actually a very deep seeds of roots of truth in them. So, you know, if you are in that dark place of feeling hopeless, it's trusting that is part of the journey, and that is part of the cycle, and you will not be in there forever. I just coming to me at the moment is what the space I'm in at the moment personally. As I said, I'm in perimenopause, but which I've been kind of aware of the last 2 years. But in recent months, well, actually over the last couple of years, I've been kind of struggling with this, like, who am I? And I know I've found my peace. I am a writer. That's it. That's why I'm a writer. That's how I express my priestesshood. But what I was thinking more of was, I had this feeling of recent months of feeling lost. I don't know who I am anymore. And there's two ways you can go with that. I don't know who I am anymore. Panic. Try to cling on to how you used to be in the earlier part of your life, or the earlier part of the season, or, you know, wherever you're. It doesn't have to be about perimenopause. You can try and cling on to what was there, what you used to be. Or you can embrace the lostness as being the void of winter. And bringing another analogy, it's like a cauldron. You're in that kind of dark place, and it's all a bit of you can feel very, very challenging. You can feel lost, but you're in the void. And actually that is a very powerful place to be in. And I've just sort of, this popped into my head this morning. I've kind of been sort of circling around this for a while, but it's actually, if you can allow yourself to be lost, there is great power and magic in that, because if you stop striving and stop struggling, the new shoots will come and you'll start to notice them, rather than looking behind you, looking like, oh, look at all the bare branches of my life, or whatever, you know what I mean? Kind of thing,
Yeah, I really love that. It feels like what you're offering there as well, to me, is that almost at that point we have a choice. It's like we can either choose to kind of cling on and not be in the truth of where we are, or we can sit there and be in that truth and know that we are able to choose what new beginning is to be birthed from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and also being okay with not knowing, which again is not something our society values. You have to be certain, you have to know. And actually just being with the not knowing, and allowing that to kind of, what's the word I'm trying to grasp for? It's like you kind of just allow that to work. Yeah, it's alchemy on you.
Yeah.
This is very much, as I said, perimenopause, but this can be applied to anybody who's had a loss, a change in their life. Perimenopause being a rite of passage that I can speak to at the moment, because that's very much what I'm in. Talking of perimenopause, I might have had a brain fog moment. I can't remember where I was going with that.
Perfect.
That's perfect. To be okay with that.
Yeah, we were talking about being lost, so that's absolutely perfect.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's funny. That's quite funny.
Gorgeous.
It'll probably come back to me later. Anyway, but this, it's allowing the energies to work with you, of being in the dark place, being in the void, and trusting that is part of the process. It's not an easy part of the journey at all. I absolutely acknowledge that. It can feel like you are dying in some ways. Part of you is. The old you is dying. Whatever has brought you to this initiatory experience. And also for me, I would also say it's not about, if you do start to feel some little seeds starting to kind of grow, it's not to grasp after them, not to kind of grab onto them too quickly, but to maybe just see what's ready to come through.
Yeah, gorgeous. Yeah, there's lots in that. And I'm just in terms of going back to the cycles, there was you talked about in your book the healing gifts of each of the cycles and the shadows of each of the cycles. So I just wondered if we could talk a bit to that. Wherever you want to take us there.
Okay. So I think it's useful, I think, when we're looking at all sorts of aspects in our healing personal journeys, to recognize that things can have gifts as well as challenges. And in terms of the cycles, I think the gifts, which I kind of can go through briefly, if you like, and I'll just go through. So in terms of their gift, it's what I think is inherent in them. But the shadows or challenges is probably how they've been twisted by patriarchal attitudes and cultures and that kind of thing. So for example, the first cycle I talk about in the book is the breath cycle, which I call the temple of presence. So in the book, as I take you through these 6 cycles, I kind of take you through them as temples, as sacred containers.
I loved that. Yeah.
So the breath is a temple of presence, and its gift is presence, because when you attend to your breath, you realize you can bring yourself into the moment, because the breath is the shortest cycle. It's always with you, and it's one of the only functions of the body that happens involuntarily, but you can also voluntarily work with it to change how you feel.
Ooh, I love that. It brings us back to choice.
Yeah, you're breathing. You're breathing. As long as you're alive, you're breathing. Or you can choose to watch your breath, or you can use breathing techniques to change your breath. So that's the gift, that presence. But the shadow, I think, there is around sort of dissociation and numbing out. And I've had over the recent years, I kind of fell out of love my breath a bit. I kind of like the friendship went a bit funny because I realized I had been for a long time using my breath to suppress how I felt. So exhale, calm down, just calm down. Whereas, which is a great gift. But if you use your breath too much to constantly keep calming yourself, well, often in the anger or the fear or the anxiety, there is a message your body is trying to communicate with you. So actually to notice when your breath feels a bit off, for example, a bit tight or a bit panicky, or there is a gift in that. The gift of presence in that is to acknowledge how you feel, to acknowledge your emotions, because your emotions and your mood very much affect your breath, and it can be expressed that way. So it's got a double-edged sword, it's going to bring us into presence, but also we can use our breath to push down challenging emotions, particularly the ones we're told not to feel, like anger. Women shouldn't do, angry women, bad witches. You get called a witch then as an insult, don't you, if you're an angry woman? So I think that's around the breath. But then the next cycle that I look at in the book is the circadian cycle, the temple of daily rhythms of day and night. It's another cycle which we're constantly going through. And I think that brings different gifts. It gives you the gift of, I call it wholehearted living, of being with where you're at. So the breath is about presence in the moment. But when we attend to our lives, our daily life, it's, where are you at? What do you want from life? It encourages you to not just kind of let every day be a whirling mass and mess of get up, run around, go to bed. It asks you to engage with your life on a daily basis. There's another gift in there of rest, the gift of sleep, but rest as well during daytime, that acknowledgement that we need periods of slowness, of moving inwards, of connecting that way. And then there's another gift of the day is liminality. And that is the edge between awake and sleep. It's a technical term, when you're falling asleep, it's a hypnagogic state. And so everybody who falls asleep experiences this. It might be for a split second, it actually might be for a few minutes, but it's a kind of weirdly kind of otherworld connection of creativity, of like answers to problems can come in at that kind of in between liminal consciousness. So I love surfing that and actually consciously working with it through meditative practices. For example, something like yoga nidra is a wonderful sort of sleepy rest meditation which can take you into that liminal space. So yeah, lots of gifts of the day.
I love how you describe that. I often describe the liminal space as that place for my women where they're kind of where they are in between where they are and where they want to be, that kind of liminal space between them creating their vision.
Well, liminal spaces are thresholds, aren't they? And I love the liminal space of dusk and twilight, and the liminal kind of around the moon, like dark moon feels quite liminal to me. So it's it's where the magic happens. It's where the magic happens. Absolutely. And you can consciously engage with that in terms of the kind of brain waves and conscious states. And I've included a simple exercise in the book. But yes, that's I love a bit of liminal surfing. And now the shadow of this cycle, which we've already touched on, is fear of the dark. On lots of different levels. As women, we're taught we're scared of quite, unfortunately, realistically scared of the dark, because that's where a lot of violence and attacks could potentially happen, particularly to women, but anybody really. But we're taught not to go out at night, aren't we, as women? To go, so to be scared of the dark, to be scared of dark nights of the soul, of the underworld. And yes, as we've already spoken a little bit about that, haven't we? So there's that fear of the dark, but as we've also already spoken about, there's great gifts and power and magic in that dark. So when we cut ourselves off from that, we are cutting ourselves off from half of life in many ways, because, you know, light and dark are the balance of the day. So that's the daily rhythms, temple or cycle. And then we move to the menstrual cycle, the temple of sacred blood, as I call it. And the gifts here really, I kind of call it your kind of inner oracle, really. It has it offers you the gift of like a really deep connection to your energy, your emotions, your needs, and a sense of spiritual connection. I know that premenstrual phase that often we feel embarrassed or shamed or it feels very challenging. You know, that is, my experience is that this is when your truth really comes out. But you know, but there's big shadows here, really. I mean, the shadows for each phase of the menstrual cycle, which, you know, it might get a little bit too long to go into all of them. So I'll just say generally the kind of the shadow then of the menstrual cycle is that it is shamed. It's still taboo in many ways. It's getting better that people are talking about it. But this idea that we shouldn't be variable in our emotions, that we should always be constantly smiling and nice and pleasant and available, is just not how we are if we have a menstrual cycle. And the shaming particularly of the premenstrual cycle is really damaging, I think, to us, because we kind of negate ourselves. You know, things like, don't talk to me, I'm premenstrual, or don't worry, if I snap, it's because I'm premenstrual. Well, actually, probably there's a lot of truth coming up for you to look at.
I kind of love that, because again, it seems I always say there's always gifts in our wounds, which is kind of what we're talking to here, really. But it always feels like although these things can feel quite damaging, they are also, in a way, deep triggers that allow us to create liberation, which it feels like, is what your journey has been all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, as I said, I'm in perimenopause, which is like one big premenstrual phase of the cycle, but a lot of stuff has come up over the last few years, of stuff which I just, particularly with my relationship with my mother, that I'm not taking this shit anymore. I'm not taking this anymore. It really saw the truth of how toxic that relationship had become. You know, and on other levels, like, you know, I stopped teaching yoga because I just realized it was just the wrong thing for me to do now. It was not my path anymore. And I made great changes in my life. And if I hadn't consciously engaged with these cycles, I think I would have just been pushing it all down, still stuck in not rocking the boat, and not living my authentic path. So it's a great gift. It's a great challenge and a great gift.
Absolutely.
So then we have the lunar cycle, the temple of the moon, which, for those listeners, if you don't have a menstrual cycle, I would say start with the lunar cycle. And the lunar cycle, again, is that, you know, it's always the same. You know, we have the new moon, we have the waxing moon, we have the full moon, and we have the waning moon and the dark moon. And it is always that cycle of birth, growth, fullness, release, and death before rebirth. And just looking up at the moon in the sky can help us to remember that. And for me, my personal kind of experience of working with the lunar cycle has been, it's kind of that external manifestation of the monthly cycle. So my menstrual cycle is my internal manifestation of it, and it's unique to me. And then you can connect to that sort of wider sense of Mother Nature holding you by looking up to the moon and how her face changes through the lunar month. So that's my experience. I know some people like to use the moon to manifest. That's personally not my journey with it, but, you know, but equally, you know, that's something which resonates with you. That's a wonderful way to harness these cyclical energies.
I personally love that as well. So that's definitely one for me, particularly with rituals as well.
Fantastic. And I guess, I mean, there is a shadow. One of the shadows here is that, well, twofold, that we might be tempted to connect to the moon at the expense of our menstrual cycle. There can be many reasons for that. It can be that the whole taboo around the menstrual cycle, you have a kind of very challenging experience with your own menstrual cycle. But there is that, it is also speaking to that tendency in our culture and a lot of spiritual practices to kind of transcend, look up, don't look down, don't look down to your womb, look up to the sky. So that's something to be aware of there. And also, I think less so perhaps now, but when I first started working with lunar cycles and kind of reading up and studying about it, often the dark moon was overlooked. So you went from the balsamic waning crescent to new moon. Let's ignore the death of the dark moon, the death energy, which we've been talking about, haven't we? So just be mindful of those kind of couple of issues, if that kind of resonates.
Love that.
And then we move to the solar cycle, the temple of the seasons of the year, which we can look at in two ways: the seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And also, this is where the wheel of the year comes in, those 8 festivals of Imbolc, spring equinox, Beltane, summer solstice, Lammas, autumn equinox, Samhain, and winter solstice. So every 6 weeks, you've got something to celebrate. Yay! And yes, so that's a beautiful way, whether it's literally just the seasons, the 4 seasons, or you feel called to connect to the 8 festivals of the wheel of the year. That is a lovely way to connect with the place you live in as well, because whether you live in the middle of a city or you live like me, I'm like on the edge of a small town, I've got a town one direction, I've got a few fields and a nice wood not far away, or you live in the middle of the countryside, or whatever variation, there's always something happening that some little bit of greenery will be finding its way up somewhere which you can connect with. And it is an invitation to connect with where you live, your sense of place through the year. So I go to a place, I call it my little sacred grove. It's just a few minutes foot walk away. It's quite unassuming. Again, I describe it in the book. It's quite an unassuming little place, but I go there, a few times a week, every week. And I've been doing that for a few years now. So I've got a lovely kind of relationship with it and how it changes and its kind of energies and spirits, the kind of spirits of the trees, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do. So, and again, I would say the shadow of this is this tendency to hate winter. There's a lot of people just, I hate November, or I can't wait till spring. And at one level, I get that, especially, seasonal affective disorder is a real thing for many people. But if you can it's an opportunity to go inwards, to slow down, to even just to recognize what nature does. Mother Nature knows there is this release and death, which is needed before spring can happen, before rebirth can happen. So I just kind of invite listeners to be mindful of their relationship with winter. And not to say you have to suddenly love it or anything like that, but just perhaps just notice what your relationship with it is and what lessons or gifts perhaps you could take from winter.
Yeah, I love that. Almost kind of that, again, back to that archetypal lens of like, what can it teach us for ourselves?
Absolutely. Because when we connect, as I say in the book, this before we get to the final temple, I just say that this cyclic awareness, honoring the seasons, is at its root. It's a form of paying attention. It's a form of mindfulness. It's embodied mindfulness. It's that at its core, and it's and it helps us to find a greater sense, I think, of peace and self-acceptance through connecting with these cycles. And so we come to the final cycle, which is this more like the arc of life rather than necessarily a repeating cycle. I'm excited for this one. So this is the cycles of life, the temple of the goddess archetypes. And these are kind of like these are underpinning all of the other cycles. These archetypes are within all of the cycles I've just spoken about. And I mentioned them briefly earlier, but I'll just say what they are. So we've got the maiden, the lover, the mother, the queen, and the crone. Now, they're not all of the archetypes out there by any means, but these are ones which kind of clearly map to the expression of these cycles and a kind of a broad template for our life. Now, I know that not all of them, these words might 100% resonate with people, but it's, you need to find your own perhaps. So like the maiden. The maiden is the new moon. She is spring. She is pre-ovulation. She's the start of the in-breath. It's that resurgence, that new life, emergence with her gifts of hope and joy. And she's also the archetype which stays with us, or is most deeply connected to us, because we were all maidens, we were all young children, and we carry her through with us throughout our whole lives. So your experience on an individual level of when you were in the maiden years can really impact on your life, on your spirit, your soul, your psyche, your mental health. As I've alluded to, when I was in my maiden years, the relationship with my mother was not what a child needs. I didn't get unconditional love. I didn't get affirmation. And I don't blame my mother for this, because as again, I've alluded to, she is the child where there's a long line of intergenerational trauma, I'll just put it that way, through my mother line. So she didn't have the opportunity, the privilege to actually bring healing to her wounds that I have had. And so unfortunately, I didn't get the kind of the affirmation, the holding, that was needed. And that has then manifested as the shadow of the maiden, which is the wounded maiden, who looks at, and this could be a whole other conversation. So just briefly, she will tend to look, well, it's the good girl, it's in many ways, but it's kind of deeper than that, because when you haven't had that secure attachment to your mother or your primary carer, there is like a hole in the soul left, a hole in the heart, which the wounded maiden then stays with you into adulthood, and you're looking outside yourself all the time for validation, for affirmation. And ultimately, the only person who can fill that hole in your soul is yourself. So I think actually recognizing that, and I think a lot of us do carry that, because it isn't necessarily that through the mothering you received. It could be through other issues around experiences at school, with other influential people in your life, as well as the wider society kind of messages which are given to girls, in terms of their bodies and how they should look and how they should or shouldn't express their sexuality. There's so much constraint, isn't there, that's put onto us, which can kind of manifest as a kind of wounded maiden.
I love that. I love the synchronicity of this, because as this is released, we will literally be deep in Invoke Your Feminine Mystery, which is guiding women through reclaiming their power from each of these phases that you're talking about. So okay. Yeah, really magical synchronicity.
So then we move to the lover archetype, who is sort of the cusp of spring into summer, Beltane, the waxing moon. And she is the lover of life. She's sensual. See, she is sexual, she is wild, she is free, she is led by love, and she is courageous. She comes from her heart, and she's the energy to me feels quite, it's that courage, actually. It's quite a strong energy, as well as being loving. It's not a fluffy kind of love for me. That's how I experience it. It's a quite a courageous, rooted love, a love of all existences, as well as love of herself. But that comes first, really. She loves herself first, so then she can love all existences. So her gifts, really, I would say, are courage and freedom. The shadow is shame, because the patriarchal conditioning, the patriarchal damage around this teaches us to shame around our bodies, shame around our sexuality, and it disempowers us. So a lot of women have body confidence issues, body image issues, don't we? And there's just so much there that we could talk about. But it is that shaming of us, just for our bodies, for our emotions, for our menstrual cycles, for not being men, basically. We are being shamed for not being a white cisgender heterosexual male. And there's and that, I think a lot of that is held in that lover archetypal energy, the shadow of it. That's very powerful. And that's kind of, I guess, would kick in around kind of, adolescence. That's kind of time, and through into our 20s is the kind of the life stage. And then we move to mother. And I want to make it very clear here that it's not this is not just about birthing children, as amazing and wonderful as that is. I don't have children myself by choice. My connection to the mother energy is through my creativity. So there's lots of different ways of connecting to the mother energy. Her gifts are unconditional love and nurturing. So, and by the way, all of these archetypes kind of exist within us, and we can invoke them, or we can reach out to goddesses who embody them. So there's lots of different ways of working with them. So with the mother stage of life, which these are very, very kind of ballpark figures, just so I had something to put, 30 to 45-ish. This is not like, you can't be in a mother energy if you're 28 or something, because it's not like that. It's not linear like that. So we could be mothering children, mothering through creative projects, but also mothering ourselves, particularly if we've got that wounded maiden who needs attending to. And that's definitely been my journey over the last, good while now, 10, 15 years, of that mothering energy. And also we bring in here the divine feminine, the ancient mother, the original, the great mother who birthed all of creation. Very powerful energy to connect with. And the shadow here is around the kind of things to do with like enmeshment, the mother who can't let go, the mother who can't allow her child to individuate, to become herself, which had been my experience. And it's something I think which, to a lesser or greater extent, many of us experience on some level, because particularly in perhaps recent in the past, my mother was born in the 1940s. She didn't have many opportunities in her area where she lived, in the class she was born into, to do anything other than be a wife and a mother. She didn't have much choice. And when women have been in that situation, this is where the patriarchal woundings come in. That there's a pressure to be the perfect mother. There's a pressure to slightly lost my thread here. This is an issue I'm still working with myself, my mother wounds. So sometimes I go a bit like disassociate. This is my inner protector. Just don't go there. Don't talk about this in public. So I just want to acknowledge that, because it can be a difficult thing to talk about.
Gorgeous. I love that you witnessed that.
Yeah, my inner protector went in, don't talk about that. My mind went blank. So that's quite interesting. So this is
I love that. Alchemy in action.
Yeah, it's a massive taboo to say, actually, I didn't receive the mothering I received. I don't blame her, but I have to deal with the consequences. But it's still a big thing to actually name that and say it out loud. So
really, really witnessing you for that. That's gorgeously owned.
So then we come to the Queen, who is kind of menopausal years, who is her gifts are of presence and protection. So think of the Queen who is queen of her realm. So you become queen of your realm. You decide what your boundaries are, which is what I've been working on these recent years. And she's a powerful, potent presence. But it's not about power over other people. It's about owning your power for yourself.
I love that, and I love how you describe that. The kind of path that secret witches walk with me is the path of their witch queen, and so I've done quite a lot of work with the queen energy, and I love that she's that you've described her here, how you described her, because for me it feels like there's this power from love in the queen. And she's also someone who has really helped me see that actually, given this whole kind of journey through the feminine archetypes, there's almost for me been a journey of like reclamation of each initiation. I saw quite clearly through my work with the Queen that actually I hadn't kind of moved into adulthood. The Queen feels like adulthood to me, and I hadn't kind of moved through that journey into adulthood because I hadn't really had come to these choice points of initiation, like in the maiden to lover, lover to mother, and never consciously chosen into them. So I absolutely love what you're describing here about the kind of life cycle archetypes here.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that actually about the feeling like you've actually getting grown up into the queen. The queen is like the most grown up one out of all of them so far, and that's actually how I feel. It's a fascinating thing as well. And also, I mean, in terms of, I mean, as I said, these energies can be actually whatever age they are a potential there. But I guess when you get into the maybe 45 plus, there's perhaps an even deeper embodiment of it. I was thinking about this earlier because I know you talk a lot about the queen archetype. And maybe this queen, when you get into the 45 plus, she's the queen archetype, but with the veil of estrogen lifted. Now that's I love that phrase. It's not mine. Jane Hardwick Collins, I heard say that, about the veil of estrogen descends at menarche, and it's the estrogen is the kind of people pleasing, making sure everybody's happy and kind of energy, and it definitely lifts as you get into perimenopause, and the veil lifts, and you're a queen without the veil. An unveiled queen. She comes from love, but she speaks truth to power and doesn't have much time for bullshit, I'm finding. Now her gift, her shadow, we kind of see in the presentation of evil queens in films and literature, kind of that tyranny and manipulation, and I think, like the evil queen in Snow White, and think those kind of things. It's a distortion. It's a distortion of the queen's potential energy. And then we come to the crone. Now, obviously, I have to talk about this on a theoretical level because I'm not there yet, but I can feel her sometimes, interestingly. But so the crone her gifts are wisdom and peace. Wisdom in that she has lived her life, and she is initiated through each of these stages. She is an initiated crone and an initiated elder who owns her wisdom. She has deep peace because she knows who she is. She doesn't have to please the male gaze anymore. She's just way past that, and she doesn't give a fuck. She's just, she's very truthful. And also, I think this is where the death rebirth goddess energy is kind of held. I think in this sort of this is the winter. This is with the Samhain, the winter solstice energy, and that what we talk about, the darkness, the death and rebirth. And I think there can be a shadow here around kind of like bitterness and gossiping and malice, and again, this is the patriarchalized kind of twisting of it, that because when you get to this age, I'm starting to feel it already because I'm 47 and I'm in perimenopause, and I can feel that panic. I'm going to be ignored, I'm going to become invisible because I'm going to be an older woman and I'll be dried up and shriveled and nobody will look at me. I can feel it's strong conditioning, that is. And I guess crones who have not owned their wisdom and their truth or haven't been allowed to, so we're talking now on an individual level, can become quite bitter and a little bit a bit nasty with it. I've seen that through my life. I've seen that of some elder women around me, workplaces and family and things like that they can get a bit bitter and twisted. But I have empathy, because if they kind of guess if they're born particularly from the 30s and the 40s and those kind of times, they've gone through decades where they didn't necessarily have the opportunities that younger women have now, and they can look at those younger women now and go and feel a bit jealous, perhaps. I don't know. There's something there.
It almost it kind of comes back to that kind of, as I was saying, about kind of not realizing I had choice when I went through my life, missing those initiations. It's almost like the shadowy crone, I guess, has missed that she has had that choice, bless her heart. So it feels like that, knowing that we have a choice to initiate ourselves into these different archetypes at each point of the feminine life cycle feels quite powerful.
Yeah, and there's choice and there's opportunity as well, isn't there? It's kind of, they kind of come together. I mean, we have a lot more, I think, opportunities now in recent decades to have, as women, to have more economic freedom, to have, education, and to embrace our witchiness, to actually embrace it, to actually say, yes, I'm a witch, and not actually be, well, obviously it's been a while in our part of the world since you're burned at a stake, but there's the metaphorical being burned at a stake, which I know other of your guests have spoken about. There is still that fear that you're going to be
yes, absolutely,
burned for being a witch. So
yeah, absolutely it's often a deep witch wound, that kind of fear, and that's why there is this fear of the witch. Gorgeous. So I'm just wondering if, to end, we can just offer a few maybe practical suggestions, just before we complete, as to how women can begin to connect with these cycles, whether that's kind of rituals or kind of whatever you can recommend for women at home.
So because this is where I started with, I would say, if you can at all possible, connect with your menstrual cycle first. So, for example, a simple ritual which I been doing for many years now is, on the first day of my bleed, I go into my little tiny temple, our third bedroom, and I do some meditation, and I pull out oracle cards for the menstrual cycle. So I have oracle. So I have a card for pre-ovulation, a card for ovulation, a card for premenstrual, and a card for the next next bleed. And then that card from the bleed becomes the overarching card for the whole of the next month. So you can have an overarching kind of guidance from the oracle card, as well as little cards for each aspect of the menstrual cycle. And I just love that, because it kind of has helped me to ritualize my bleed, and to really recognize it. And again, to recognize that I am going through these phases each time I go through a menstrual cycle, a full menstrual cycle. And having a different oracle card for each one just helps you kind of to remember that as well, and to help you to tune into kind of your inner wisdom, inner thoughts, inspiration around the potentials of the energies of each phase of the menstrual cycle. So that's a really kind of relatively simple one for your menstrual cycle, which you could do on the dark moon or the new moon, depending on which you feel called to do as well. And also for the seasons, for example, as well, the wheel of the year, I have an altar. So I have an altar in my little tiny temple, and for every 6 weeks, as we move through the wheel of the year, I just change a few things on my altar. I change pictures of the goddess, I change different colored crystals. For example, I have different things which kind of bring in some flowers or twigs or leaves and things like that. So that's another way you can make a physical manifestation of, and a reminder that you can see daily of a connection to the cycles. So I mean, I give lots of different examples and suggestions in my book, but fundamentally for me, I like to keep it simple, because if it's too complex, you might not do it. And it's better to do something simply than try to do it all perfectly and for all the different colored candles and have all this and all that, which is beautiful if you can do it, absolutely. But my fundamental advice would be, find a way which resonates with you to connect with a cycle or more cycles, and to keep it simple so you can do it.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I would love for you to share anything that you're working on at the moment and where people can find you, so that I can include that in the show notes and people can have a little look at your work and maybe read your book, Cycles of Belonging.
Okay, so I'm working on 2 more books at the moment, one of which the working title is, which might change at last minute because I have a tendency to do that. The working title is Her Soul is Ablaze, and it's poems and kind of words of inspiration and comfort, motivation through times of change. So that I had I receive poems when I write them. I literally receive them. I have to start writing because they've arrived. I wrote 45 in 2 weeks recently. So so that's ongoing. And I'm also writing a book around this whole piece around healing the wounded maiden through the sacred feminine archetypes, through connecting to the Great Mother. So I'm working on that as well. So those are my 2 books I'm working on. So, and in terms of where people can find me, my website is stellatomlinson.com, where you can find out about all of my books. I've got little readings of little videos of extracts of Cycles of Belonging, for example, and my other books on there as well. Find out a little bit more about me. If you want to keep in touch, you can sign up for my soul notes, which I send out. But they were every fortnight, but I've gone a bit sort of as the mood takes me, which is, I think, where I'm at in my life at the moment. And in terms of Instagram, social media, I'm on Instagram with stellatomlinson.priestess, which can be words from my books. I share pictures of the seasonal changes and the occasional rant about patriarchy.
Okay, gorgeous. Well, thank you so much for sharing all your magic with us. I loved exploring the different cycles, and it feels really an important one for the witch to really sink into and connect with. So thank you for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
It's my pleasure. Today's episode explored the healing possibilities of reconnecting with the cycles of life. Here are my takeaways. Often our first experience of feminine cyclical living can be that of shame when we experience our first bleed. Connecting to our cycles in adulthood as we learn more about them can be very healing for this. Life is not linear, it operates in spirals, yet often we can fear spiral paths because they feel messy and we long for control. But a life of magic wasn't made to be linear, so it's worth unlocking cyclical living in order to embrace soul. There's often a beauty found in the darkness of the winter of each of our cycles, and this time can be an initiation into death and rebirth that is so powerful. The temptation in the spiritual path is to often ascend beyond the darkness, and this is the beauty of working with both the witch archetype and the winter of our cycles. They show us the beauty that can be found in facing our truth and the possibility there is to be reborn. In each cycle, that liminal space, that phase between where we are and where we are going, or the phase between wake and sleep, is always where the magic occurs. The various stages in the life cycles of the goddess archetypes of maiden, lover, mother, queen and crone offer us a chance to choose to reinitiate ourselves into adulthood or the next phase of our lives instead of staying stuck in our inner child. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.